Hello, everybody. I'm Peter Julian, Member of Parliament for New Westminster Burnaby, and welcome to our Disability Town Hall. As many of you know, we've done this annually in New Westminster and Burnaby, and we are opening it up today to people right across the country. And I would like to thank my NDP colleagues who have all stepped up to provide information so that people can come on and learn how they can get the disability tax credit. This is important because there are many people with disabilities that do not currently have the disability tax credit. And yet, with the new emergency benefit that the NDP fought for, they will need the disability tax credit certificate to get the $600 benefit. And so I wanted to make sure, and my NDP colleagues and Jagmeet Singh, our national leader, wanted to make sure that people had the information so that they can go see their doctor or a medical practitioner and start the process to get the disability tax credit certificate. Now, this is not saying that we believe that this is a solution to the pandemic. And I would like to say to everyone who is who's watching tonight or listening tonight that we hope that you're keeping safe and keeping healthy, and your loved ones are keeping safe and keeping healthy during this pandemic. We believed that the best solution to the pandemic and providing supports to people with disabilities was a universal benefit that Jagmeet Singh talked about from the very beginning. A universal benefit would have gone to everybody who needed it, and the supports would have been in place. The government has refused that, and so the NDP brought forward a motion to provide an emergency benefit. This was months ago. And then the government announced a partial benefit that only was for people who were registered with the disability tax credit. We fought to expand that to everybody who has a federal registration, whether that is the disability tax credit or the Canada Pension Plan disability, or a veteran's disability. Those are all people who are registered in the federal system. But as we fought to get this emergency benefit for people with disabilities, we discovered that the federal government does not register people who are registered provincially for disability. Unless they have the CPPD, the Canada Pension Plan disability, unless they have or you have the disability tax credit, federally, the national government in the CRA database, you don't exist. This is something that the NDP is going to push to change. What happens is a person with disabilities files a tax return and they are simply lumped in with any other type of social assistance. This needs to change. And we're going to continue to push so that the emergency benefit goes to every person with a disability, including people who are registered provincially, but not federally. As well, we will continue to push for the idea of a universal benefit during this pandemic. And that the reality is that would have been cheaper and more effective and reached everybody who is struggling to get through this pandemic. And if Mr. Trudeau had said yes to Jagmeet Singh months ago, we would be in a very different situation today. I do want to point out that estimates say that Jagmeet Singh's approach would have been cheaper and more effective than Mr. Trudeau's. And secondly, Mr. Trudeau had no delays or hesitation in providing supports to the banking sector of $750 billion. Not all of that is a grant, but the reality is the banking sector is seeing significant profits through this pandemic, and that has been aided and abetted by the federal government. As well, tonight is not an endorsement of the disability tax credit. There are many problems with the disability tax credit, but we want to make sure you know how to access it if you don't currently have access to it. And so that is the goal tonight. It will take about 20-25 minutes, but we want to explain what the eligibility is for the disability tax credit and the process that you have to go through. And our goal is to make sure as NDP MPs that everybody possible gets that universal benefit over the next few months. There is a 60-day grace period starting this week. So if you sign up for the disability tax credit and you are accepted in the next 60 days, you will have the $600 emergency benefit provided to you. So I will start with the presentation, and then of course people will be putting questions in, and so I will go to those questions and thank people who have joined us tonight. I will disappear for a moment as we put the presentation up. I've got my terrific technical support from Elodie, so she will put on screen the disability tax credit presentation. We have done these across the country, and I always start with this story about George, who is carrying a check from the disability tax credit. George passed away 2 years ago, but George was kind of the poster boy, if you like, of applying for the disability tax credit. He didn't know it existed, like so many people with disabilities in their families. So when he applied, he actually got a retroactive payment of $13,000. Many people with disabilities don't apply because it is a non-refundable tax credit. We're working to change that. What that means is it brings down your income tax paid or gives you a rebate on income tax that you have paid. For somebody who has a low income, particularly people on provincial disability plans, they don't pay taxes necessarily, which means the disability tax credit up until now hasn't been a benefit. But we are hoping with this seminar tonight that this will give you a sense of how you can run through this process in order to ensure that you can access that $600 emergency benefit. So Elodie, if you can start the next page, please. So here is eligibility for the disability tax credit. There's a form, and you can get that form from your member of parliament. It's called the T2201. You can also get it from Revenue Canada, which is the disability tax credit certificate. And so on that certificate, which the MP doesn't fill out, it has to be your doctor, a medical practitioner. We'll come back to that in a moment. But if that medical practitioner, doctor, or another specialist certifies any of the following, you're probably eligible. First off, that you are blind. Secondly, that you have a severe and prolonged impairment in a physical or mental function that markedly restricts your ability to perform a basic activity of daily living, or as a result of significant restrictions in two or more basic activities. The cumulative effect, the combined effect, is equivalent to being markedly restricted. Or you need and dedicate time for life-sustaining therapy to support a vital function. So let's be clear. This is not based on your diagnosis. Sometimes people will ask me, well, I have this condition. Does this mean I have the disability tax credit? It's not the diagnosis that counts. It is the impact of that diagnosis on your physical or mental functions. So that's important to note as we go into each of these categories. So the basic activities of daily living are the kinds of things that people do every day. For example, speaking, feeding, hearing, dressing, walking, mental functions necessary for everyday life, and we'll come back to that in a moment, and also elimination, bowel or bladder functions. George, that you saw at the beginning of the presentation, actually had a bowel disorder. That is why he qualified for the disability tax credit and received, because he'd been paying income taxes, he received the rebate. These are the activities that need to be impacted for you to access the disability tax credit. So what is the term markedly restricted? Well, markedly restricted, the way Revenue Canada basically puts it forward, is that all are substantially all the time, like 90% of the time. You're unable to perform one or more of the basic activities of daily living, even with therapy and the use of appropriate devices and medication. So if you 90% of the time are not able to perform those functions, the ones that we've just talked about, and at the same time, it takes you perhaps 3 times longer than somebody who does not have that disability. That's generally the rule of thumb for Revenue Canada. If it takes you 3 times longer to perform the function, or if you can't do it at all, again, walking, dressing, feeding, speaking, those activities of daily living, if it takes you 3 times longer than somebody without the disability, you're probably going to qualify for the disability tax credit. As well, as I mentioned earlier, if you've got combined conditions, so a number of those basic activities of daily living in combination, even though it's not necessarily 3 times longer, but a combination of ability to feed, dress, and walk, you don't meet that same criteria for one activity. But if in combination, a number of those activities do have substantially restrict you, you're probably likely to qualify for the disability tax credit. And there's also the life-sustaining therapy. Now, this is therapy that supports a vital function. Kidney dialysis would be one example. Lung physiotherapy would be another. And to qualify, you need to be dedicating time for this therapy at least 3 times a week for an average of at least 14 hours per week. So 3 times a week, 14 hours a week is the threshold for the life-sustaining therapy like kidney dialysis. Now, another question that comes up often is, it has to be a prolonged disability. That's something that it has lasted or is expected to last for at least 12 months. We're not talking about a temporary disability as a result of a car accident, for example. We're talking about a disability that is going to be continuous for at least a year. And if the doctor attests to that, then you would qualify, if you meet the other criteria, for the disability tax credit. So who can sign this form that I'll be coming to in a moment? This form is really the key to the disability tax credit, and of course the emergency benefit. So medical doctors, your doctor can sign any of these basic activities of daily living. An optometrist can sign for vision, audiologist for hearing. My wife, Lee May, is a clinical audiologist, so she has signed the form on occasion in her practice. For occupational therapists, that would be for walking, feeding, and dressing. Psychologists for mental functions, speech language pathologists for speaking, physiotherapists, for example, for walking. Now, here's a key point that some people raise, and it's a valid one, that sometimes doctors will actually charge for filling out the forms. And I understand that. It's a barrier. We believe that it is important to have your doctor fill out these forms, and hopefully that the doctor won't charge. But if the doctor does say, well, we're going to charge for this, here are some of the possibilities. You could certainly go to another doctor who isn't charging for the form. That's one possibility. Secondly, in the midst of a pandemic, where it is so important for people to access the emergency benefit, the $600, asking your doctor to waive that fee is, I think, a perfectly valid request. People with disabilities are struggling. They're trying to put food on the table, keep a roof over their head. And so it is normal, I think, for a doctor to understand that and to waive the fee. But a third possibility is to say to the doctor, can you bill me on this and I'll pay you when I get the money? If the $600 comes in and you do have to pay out $100, that's unfortunate and tragic. But I think the important thing is to make sure that you have the resources to put some food on the table and to provide some supports for those essential things. And so here, those are three options that I suggest to you: going to another doctor, asking the doctor to waive the fee, or asking the doctor to allow you to pay later. It's unfortunate, and this is why I say I do not endorse the disability tax credit. I do not endorse it. If the NDP was in government and Jagmeet Singh was the prime minister, we would be taking a much better approach. But this is what exists now. And we want to make sure that people get the supports that we have managed to fight to obtain for people with disabilities. So the issue now is the disability tax credit certificate. I mentioned earlier that this form, the T2201, is absolutely essential for this disability tax credit. You can get it from your member of parliament, absolutely, and you need to take it to your doctor or your medical practitioner, and they need to fill it out. And it is a questionnaire that talks about the impacts, at least 90%, as I mentioned earlier, that the impairments of daily living exist, and that what that impact is on your basic activities of daily living. Now, we need to have that qualified practitioner certify it. And one thing I would remind folks of, make sure that your doctor writes legibly on the form so that Revenue Canada can contact them. Often doctors write with chicken scratch. That's what they learn at medical school. It's not going to work. Revenue Canada will be following up, so it has to be legible. And once you get this T2201, you can send it to your tax center immediately. As I mentioned, there's a 60-day grace period. So send it in immediately, or go to your MP and have your MP send in this form, because that is really the starting point for qualifying for the disability tax credit and for the emergency benefit. And if you live in New Westminster and Burnaby, we're more than pleased if you let us know. We can send it in for you. You can also send it directly to the tax center. Now, Revenue Canada, under this government, has tried to make it more difficult for people with disabilities to access the disability tax credit. And so it is possible that the CRA will try to reject it. We get a lot of cases like that, and we go to bat for our constituents. You can check what the explanation is. In some cases, we've seen doctors haven't written legibly. Canada Revenue Agency's not been able to contact the doctors. And so, as a result, it's been rejected. So checking that is important. We can still send in that additional information to make sure that it gets reviewed, and you can file a formal objection to appeal the decision as well. And involve your member of parliament. In this riding, we get involved in these cases, and we advocate for people who have been rejected by the Canada Revenue Agency. It's a bit strange to me when there are massive amounts from very wealthy people going to overseas tax havens, Canada Revenue Agency doesn't do a thing about that, but they do try to crack down on people with disabilities trying to access small benefits. That is something that needs to change in CRA. But for the moment, the reality is if they say no, that doesn't end it. We can still fight and we can still get approval. And in our office, we've done it numerous times. So this information is important, that prior tax returns can be adjusted if you do have the ability to get a reimbursement for previous taxes paid, or to transfer that to somebody else in your household that has paid taxes. You can actually go back to the date of your disability if the doctor's indicated that on your form. And so you can send in an adjustment request, and the forms are available again through my office or through your local member of parliament's office. And normally, if the doctor says that the disability is permanent, then CRA will not try to mess with that and have you be reevaluated next year. As I mentioned, we have a 60-day grace period right now, so time is of the essence to get it in. And we will continue to push CRA if you're in New Westminster or Burnaby to make sure that they approve it and that they don't try to mess with that approval process. This is information that's important if you do have people in your household who pay taxes. You can transfer the disability tax credit amount to your spouse or common law partner, or another supporting person who lives in the same household, so that you can get, as I mentioned earlier, the issue of making sure that that people, if somebody lives in your household and pays income tax, they can be considered a supporting person and they can actually claim a retroactive reimbursement. And my final point is that Revenue Canada, this is a little comic where a woman says, Revenue Canada, again, having completed your tax form, not to worry, simply pick up your phone and give one of our agents a call. That's all there is to it. Easy, you bet. So why wait? Call us now and get the information you need. And then the person has obviously passed away while they were waiting in the lineup for Revenue Canada. And their loved one says, still busy, as that person's passed away. So that's the end of the presentation. And I'm going to go now to questions that have been coming in. We will spend the next 15, 20 minutes answering those questions. And I'm just going to, there we go, and back up. And hopefully I'm good to go. I'm just checking that our technical support. So the first question that came in prior to are people on CPP disability going to access this emergency benefit? So as I say, for what the NDP fought for, and what we obtained from the government after months of fighting, unbelievable that we had to put in so much effort when we know that people with disabilities are struggling through this pandemic. So right now, if you have the disability tax credit, if you have Canada Pension Plan disability, or if you have veterans disability benefits, then you qualify. And that's why we're doing the town hall tonight, to make sure that people who are on provincial plans that don't show up in the federal system at all can actually get the disability tax credit in the 60-day grace period so they can get the emergency benefit. Second question came in before, is diabetes classed as a disability? Again, it's not the diagnosis that counts, it's the impact on the activities of daily living. So if somebody with diabetes is taking kidney dialysis, for example, 14 hours a week, they would qualify. If there has been an impact on basic activities of daily living. For example, walking, dressing, feeding, and the doctor attests that that impact means it takes 3 times longer than for somebody without the disability, then that person would qualify. But I'm not a doctor. We don't do diagnosis here. It is really your doctor or medical practitioner who will indicate to what whether or not the person will qualify for the DTC. And as I mentioned, Canada Revenue Agency under this government is very mean-spirited. And so often we have to fight to make sure that that approval from the doctor is actually validated by Revenue Canada. Third question, again, came in beforehand. With the 60-day extension, does that mean a person with a disability tax credit will have to wait another 60 days for the money, or can they receive it sooner? We have pressed for the government to make those payments by the end of August. So for the first payments out for disability tax credit, we have pressed them to make that payment in the next month. Same with the Canada Pension Plan Disability and Veterans Disabilities should be a few weeks after that. For the 60-day grace period, it probably will not be until after the 60-day grace period has expired. So we're talking about money that is coming in, but it will still be weeks, even for people who are already registered with the disability tax credit. Becky asks, thank you, Becky. Has the $600 one-time payment passed in the Senate? It's getting royal sent this week, which is why I'm saying the 60-day grace period really starts this week. And so that's important to note for folks, and that's why we're having the town hall tonight. We wanted to be on top of this, and I wanted to shout out to a whole bunch of NDP caucus members that helped to promote this this evening. Everybody from Jack Harris in Newfoundland, Labrador, to Heather McPherson in Alberta, and Scott Duval in Ontario, and Laura Collins in Victoria, and many other NDP MPs made sure that there was information available so people could sign on. We want to make sure you got the information early so that you can get going and talk to your doctor or medical practitioner. Penny asked when the $600 is coming, and as I mentioned, I think there's basically 3 payments, 3 payment periods. The first for people who are already on the disability tax credit, hopefully by the end of August. We've insisted on that from the government. A few weeks after that for people on CPP disability and veterans disability. And then at the end of the expiry of the 60-day grace period for people who are just applying for the DTC over this period. Cindy Kayla asks, thank you, Cindy, will the $600 be sent out automatically? Yes, it will. So you won't have to apply again. It's in the federal government jurisdiction. They've got names. They have to do some merging because there's some overlap between CPP disability and the disability tax credit. They are saying they don't want to pay people twice, and so it will take some time. But as I mentioned, in terms of the payments going out, it should be going out automatically. Again, if you're on the DTC and you haven't received it in September, you should be contacting your member of parliament and contacting so that they can do the follow-up. Members of parliament have a responsibility to do casework follow-up and to fight hard on your behalf. And so you shouldn't hesitate to contact your MP. That's what NDP MPs do. They go to bat for people. And this is extremely important part of our work. Bonnie asks, will there be more flexibility and understanding for diseases like multiple sclerosis that do not fit into the categories? Thank you, Bonnie. I think of my cousin, Julie Searle, who passed away from multiple sclerosis. And I believe we need to completely change the disability supports in this country, work with provinces, put in place a Canadians with Disabilities Act. This is something the NDP has all stood for, and all of the NDP MPs believe in this. But for the moment, in terms of multiple sclerosis and the disability tax credit, if you haven't already applied, in most cases, I think the impacts on the basic activities of daily living of MS are such that you should be able to qualify. And there is an ability with combined impacts, as we mentioned earlier. If you have a substantial impact in a number of the basic activities of daily living, normally for MS, that should mean that you qualify. Gord asks, is it possible to change the DTC to something similar to the child tax benefit so everyone can benefit from it regardless of their income? I would say, Gord, that is why Jagmeet Singh was talking about the universal benefit. We wanted to make sure everybody was taken care of in this time of pandemic. Other countries have gone this route. Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Morneau flatly refused. They provided a lot of supports to the big banks and to big business. They flatly refused the universal benefit. So what the NDP has been doing is pushing for students, pushing for seniors, pushing for people with disabilities to fill in all of the massive gaps that come with the CERB. And so it would have made more sense, and the Parliamentary Budgetary Office was very clear, it would have cost less and been more effective to put in place Jagmeet Singh's plan and the NDP's plan, rather than the piecemeal basis that the government decided to go. So is it possible? We are going to keep fighting for this universal benefit. The government and the Conservatives don't seem interested at all, but we will keep fighting. And in a new parliament, with a lot more NDP MPs, I think we will see the possibilities that we can actually change to a universal benefit that provides supports for people. So we will keep pushing for it. And like Tommy Douglas always said around universal health care, it's only possible if we keep fighting for it. We'll keep fighting for it. Heidi Clarkson asks, have you assisted people living with Parkinson's with this procedure? Yes, absolutely. I mentioned earlier the mental functions necessary for everyday life. And I should mention that for Alzheimer's, and I'll come back to Parkinson's in a moment. Things like adaptive functioning, memory, problem solving, goal setting, and judgment. For Alzheimer's, often people with Alzheimer's that is more than a mild case do qualify for the disability tax credit. For people with Parkinson's, absolutely. Again, with those impacts on daily living, that is so important. These impacts on speaking, feeding, hearing, dressing, walking, mental functions necessary for everyday life, and elimination bowel or bladder functions. All of those are really important. And that's what the doctor will evaluate. Certainly for Parkinson's, that would make a big difference in the sense that for Parkinson's, I think most people would qualify. Becky asks, what happens if you're denied? Can you appeal? Absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, get involve your member of parliament. They should be working for you. And get them involved in the appeal so that you can push back hard on CRA. It is trying to crack down on people with disabilities when they allow overseas tax havens to flourish. That's $25 billion a year that we lose in overseas tax havens. CRA does nothing about. Nobody's ever been charged. And yet, as far as people with disabilities, they're cracking down. So we have to push back against that. What about people with mental health issues? Deirdre asks, as I mentioned earlier, so impacts, for example, on problem solving, memory, and adaptive functioning. These are all issues around mental health that, yes, would mean if the doctor, the psychiatrist or psychologist indicates has an impact on the activities of daily life, absolutely should qualify the person for the DTC. Jennifer asks, can you get the DTC if you were on PWD with no income? Yes. So the disability tax credit is designed for people to apply regardless of what their income level is. And this is where we had a real objections to the federal government's approach until we realized that they have been incompetent and they have never, in years of people with disabilities filing tax returns, actually indicated who was a person with disabilities getting provincial income from persons with disabilities programs. So if you have no income, you still qualify for the disability tax credit if you meet those impacts of basic activities of daily living. You can still qualify. The problem has been some doctors charge, and because if you have no income and no one in your household has income, you don't pay income tax, there's no benefit to you. Now there is, through the emergency benefit that the NDP fought like heck for and finally succeeded in getting into place. And so regardless of what your income level is, provided you meet those that threshold on basic activities of daily living and you qualify for the DTC, the disability tax credit, you will have the emergency benefit come to you. Kelly asks, if a person has been denied and they feel the doctor did not fill out the form accurately, should they submit a new T2201? Very good question, Kelly. If you don't feel your doctor is doing it properly, I'd suggest you go see another doctor. I mean, some doctors are extraordinarily good and important and understand the importance of filling the form out properly. Other doctors, if they don't care that much about it and they're not doing justice to the impacts on daily living, those activities of daily living that you know are profound impacts on your life, you really need to get another doctor, a specialist, somebody who actually understands and will fill it out properly. And then, yes, you can fill out a new T2201 and send it in. And if you're in my riding, we'll be backing you up and pushing. Revenue Canada will say, well, this other doctor said this. But if you've got a strong MP, if you've got an NDP MP on your side, they'll be pushing to make sure CRA doesn't try any monkey business around the application. So yes, you should submit a new one if possible. And then Sarah asks, the criteria for DTC is far more stringent than Canada Pension Plan Disability. How can people who need the extra support but aren't completely bedbound access it? Well, again, it's the disability, the impacts on activities of daily living. So your doctor filling that out properly will often mean that somebody who is who has the disability will access through the disability tax credit. But if you actually have CPPD now, the NDP fought for you, and anybody who has Canada Pension Plan Disability will also receive the $600 emergency benefit. So we've already fought for you. So you don't have to worry about choosing between the two. If you have CPPD, you will get the benefit. If you have disability tax credit right now, you will get the benefit. If you have a veteran's disability allowance, you will get the benefit. The NDP fought for you and made sure that everybody in the federal system who is designated as disabled in the federal system gets the benefit. The problem is the federal government has never made the effort to sit down with the provinces and see who across this country is registered as provincially disabled, but not registered federally. And that's got to change. And you have the commitment of the NDP caucus, Daniel Blakey, who's been our tireless critic on this issue. We're going to keep fighting so that we get in place, finally, a disability support level across the country that means that people with disabilities are no longer marginalized. Now, so we're going to continue to fight for you. I see that we don't have any other questions. And so I just wanted to end by giving my phone number. It is 604-775-5707, 604-775-5707. Please don't hesitate to contact my office. I also have a website, Peter Julian, that's JULIAN.ca. peterjulian.ca. You'll have our our email addresses. Yeah, the phone number. We'd be pleased to send out a copy of this presentation, which we actually got from Revenue Canada staff. And we will make sure that you get it. And I strongly suggest that you contact your member of parliament for supports. We have a 60-day window. That's what we fought for, so that if you're registered as somebody who's provincially disabled but not registered federally, so you can get that that sorely needed benefit. But it doesn't end there. It's only a start in terms of the supports, and the NDP caucus will continue to fight for you. And please feel free to send in by email or by comments on Facebook your comments and suggestions about this. Thank you so much. And a special shout out to our interpreters, Jessica and Liz. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. To the deaf community, thank you. And we hope that we can get as many people as possible registered for the disability tax credit to access the emergency benefit. In the meantime, please stay safe and stay healthy in this time of pandemic. Thank you very much.